the oyster is a great thing to eat. We should eat more oysters.
Right.
We should eat more clams. Florida, oddly, is an amazing sustainable seafood scene. Just the work that they do with the Florida stone crab, right? That every year they just harvest like the left arm, and they put the crab back, and the next year it's the right arm, and they put the crab back.
Really?
Yeah, it's a brilliant fishing industry.
That is small.
They don't kill the animal. The claw grows back.
Right.
And it's absolutely
and they all fit
brilliant.
nicely on the plate, all side by side.
I don't like that you're telling me something good about Florida.
They have a great shrimping scene. They're actually leaders in sustainable seafood.
Well, the seafood and fishing is such a gigantic part of their economy. It makes sense that they would do that.
That's a smart thing.
Yeah, grouper fishing down there is a giant part of their
There's
industry.
a good book that was published a few years ago, The Big Oyster, I think, Mark Kurlansky. He wrote a book
The history
about
of the
cod.
oyster.
Yeah.
The New York and the history of the oyster. That's
and it's
incredible.
Super interesting because his thing was like, we try to portray our history as like glorious, and we herded bisons before for protein, and that's how we started our like modern farming. But in fact, we probably farmed oysters and snails and clams because they don't move, and they're the most prolific and the most abundant source of protein.
Kurlansky, in that book, Kurlansky brings up a premise, and I'm loosely interpreting it now because I read this book a few years ago, but think of this for a second, right? The island of Manhattan is all the rivers around it, all the water systems around it, is actually one of the greater oyster situations on the Atlantic East Coast, right? The reason that the population exploded in Manhattan in the early days was that any person could literally get off a boat, walk onto the island of Manhattan, homeless, broke, and sleep in an alley and walk down to the river and pick 5 oysters. A small oyster is 5 grams of protein, right? A medium oyster's got 10 grams of protein. So a completely destitute person could just eat 6 oysters a day, 3 oysters, and live again another day to find a job. So the population ultimately, New York City and its population was based on this this huge supply of oysters.
Wow.
Yeah. There was a free, available source of protein that will make you live another 24 hours. So if it takes you 3 days to find a job, 4 days to find a job, 20 days to find a job, you're not going to die because there's oysters.
Look at this.
And they found oysters.
What is this from?
Harlem River.
Right
Oysters.
Oh, this is incredible.
Yeah.
There's actual islands that they thought were like geological formation that are made of oyster shells.
This
layers and layers of oyster shells.
The article that Jamie put up is from Thrillist. Is that what it's from? Pull up to the top so I can tell people what the name of it is. Why oysters are ridiculously important to the history of New York City. And it's just showing all these ancient photos of mounds of oyster shells. And
there's an amazing program today. Some of the areas, they take these giant cages. One oyster, if I'm correct, filters 4 metric tons of water per day. From what I understand, I might be wrong with my math. So take this, for instance, a caged box of thousands of oysters. There it is. There's the math.
A single oyster can filter about 30 to 50 gallons of water every day.
Loose math.
And in case you haven't noticed, New York's waterways aren't exactly the cleanest. The folks behind the Billion Oyster Project are trying to change that by recycling shells from the partnering restaurants and getting them back in the water to build oyster reefs. The goal is to add 1 billion oysters to the water by 2035. So far, they've restored 1 acre. 1.5 acres of reefs. Don't say 1.05, bitch. You got an acre. Oh, you just adding those extra 2 numbers. 1.05 acres of reefs and count 11.5 million newly grown oysters.
But the oyster will clarify the water. It'll make a murky river clear again.
Wow. But does that affect the taste of the oyster?
They don't eat those oysters. I think those are pulled back into landfill after or mulched into gardens.
Or for the shells
farming.
again to re-put for more reefs. But the oyster is interesting. It doesn't move, right? An oyster, it opens its shells to feed.
Showing how they do it. This is incredible.
And the oyster, that the oyster it will change gender according to the density of the population. So it'll go from male to female in order to balance the population.
Look at that water.
That's incredible. We're watching a video where the oyster recovery, what does it say?
It was a time lapse of it.
Oh, sorry. So it's a time lapse, but it said, what does it say it was from?
Oyster filtration.
Right, but there was a watermark on the video there in the corner. It was showing.
Oyster recovery partnership. Oyster recovery partnership.
Yeah, so the watermark is, so what they do is they have this horrible green water, they chuck these oysters in and it turns it completely clear. That's amazing. I did not know that. I did know that they used to eat lobsters, and they thought of lobsters as poor people food because they would just get them out of the river.
The rich
feed
kids
the
ate
prisoners.
bologna.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
In New Brunswick, they used to harvest the lobsters to feed to the prisoners, and keep the shells as fertilizer. You know?
Jefferson was one of the first presidents to bring the lobster into the White House because it was seen as servant's food.
When did it switch?
Jefferson.
So when he started doing that, that's when people realized it was so delicious?
No,
Well,
that's
he
with
made
the
it
lobster
socially
spaghetti at Joe
accepted.
Beef. We changed the whole thing.
The lobster spaghetti at Joe Beef is insane. That lobster spaghetti, that's off the charts.
You know, also the child labor laws were instaured primarily because of the kids that used to work in oyster shucking plants.
Really?
Yeah. We had one of our best friend, if not our best friend, passed away like 6 months ago, John Bill. He was a great chucker. He helped us at the bar, but he's like deep into sustainability and history of oysters and everything. And he was like the source for oysters for everything.
He wrote a beautiful book.
Yeah.
We'll send you a copy. It's an incredible book.
They're a good food for vegans to consider too because they're more primitive than most plants.
Yeah. From
Most mollusks are.
John used to call them ocean cupcakes.
Well, they're delicious. It's a great source of protein, but it's also they don't have any nerve endings. They're not feeling anything.
Oh, it's a sea vegetable.
Yeah, it basically is.
Yeah.
We have an issue, or some people, not myself, but some people have an issue with things that are capable of moving.
Yeah.
Like for whatever reason, we just decide that don't eat that. But if you want to talk about something sustainable, like mollusks and seafood,
Yeah.
I mean, they can be commercially farmed. They actually do have a positive impact, as you're describing, on the environment.
Incredible source of protein as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and really like a complete source of protein, not like a very bioavailable source, unlike a lot of vegetable proteins.